This week, PSW founder and CEO Dan DeCloss joins us to discuss how to conduct threat-informed penetration tests. In the security news, submerged under blankets in a popcorn tin is where they found it. Indirect branch tracking. Don't hack me, bro. We're here from the government to scan your systems. Fizzling out security. Static and dynamic analysis for the win. BYODC. That's bring your own domain controller. Application context matters. If you want an update, you better have an Intel CPU. One-time programs, URL scan is leaking, hacking load balancers, and it's all about the company that you keep. All that and more on this episode of Paul Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly.
Right now, everybody is talking about cryptocurrency, and the cybercriminals are hiding in the conversation. Cybercriminals use social engineering loaded with urgency and fear to successfully prey on your company, your employees, and your customers. Spear phishing is just one of 13 types of email threats. Barracuda has identified these 13 types and shows you how you can protect your company, your customers, and your reputation. Find out about the 13 email threat types and Barracuda email protection. Get your free ebook at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda.
And welcome to the show. But first, let me introduce you to a man who does have an Intel CPU processor. The problem is it's an 8088 without the math coprocessor and the turbo buttons disconnected. Mr. Paul Asadorian.
Welcome, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly, episode number 762, being recorded here in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. Mr. Larry Pesce. It's to my left.
Indeed.
What's up, dude?
Indeed I am. Yeah, it's a harrowing tale getting here this week with everything going on, and we're technically down 2 out of 2 vehicles in the Pesce household.
I know,
moment,
right?
So it's crazy.
Vehicles are dropping
Crazy.
like flies. During my intro, you were like, Paul has Intel CPUs. I'm like, yeah, I got AMD ones and a couple of ARM ones as well.
And some leg ones.
And some leg ones.
No. Wait, no.
I mean, if I dug deep enough, I probably have some Spark, maybe.
Any Motorola 80 series?
Maybe.
I got one of those. What was the Commodore 64?
We'll research that and get back to you. On the line,
6502. 6502.
6502. I got one of those.
Sam Bounce here with us. Sam, welcome.
Yeah, glad to be here, especially if you're going to talk about the 6502. When computing was great.
Oh my God, Sam's excited that we that's amazing. Mr. Tyler Robinson is here with us. Tyler, welcome.
What's up, Paul? Those were simpler days for processors as we have dove down the rabbit hole this week.
Yeah, none of this SGX enclave nonsense. Mandy Logan's here with us with a very shiny hat.
My shiny PSW hat. Yes, I am. I think there should be turbo buttons on everything.
I think, that's an amazing point. Mr. Josh Marpet, I'm not going to ask you where your turbo button is.
Oh, baby.
We already know.
We know, and so we pushed it right before the show, so it's good. Josh will be in turbo mode for the rest of the show.
Suppose that's possible.
All right. Thank you, Josh, for cooperating with us. Let's see. Security Weekly listeners, that's you. We need to hear your voices. Well, not your actual voice, maybe, but leave us your feedback on Apple Podcasts and submit a screenshot of it to our giveaway for a chance to win a $100 gift card from Hacker Warehouse. This giveaway will be open until the end of the year. That's this year, 2022. We appreciate your honest feedback, unless you don't like the show, in which case, please lie. So you can contribute to make our content great for the audience. Please visit securityweekly.com/giveaway to enter. Please join me in welcoming Dan DeCloss, the founder and CEO of PSW, back to the show. Dan's background in application security and penetration testing started at PSW. Well, because, who really enjoys writing reports? Am I right, Dan? Dan joins us tonight to explore what it means to shift left with your penetration testing and how to create a threat-informed testing plan. Dan, welcome back.
Hey, thanks. Great to be back. Always good to be on the show. I always enjoy it. So thank you.
It's awesome, Dan. Great to have you back. And our topic for today, it's kind of interesting. Like, should we start with like, what do you mean by threat-informed pen test? Might be the right question, I think.
I think that's a great question. No, my thesis, that maybe I'm just on a rant for myself, but I've actually validated this with other folks, and we have several customers that take an approach. So
what you say is this is a thing. This is the thing. You've made
this is a thing.
Okay.
There's at least two people talking about it.
So it's a thing. Okay.
And now there's like six. Right?
Yeah. Now we're talking about it, so it's definitely a thing.
Yeah, it's spreading.
Yeah, starting to move it here. No, it's the notion of, we talk a lot about, building out a continuous testing program and incorporating pen testing in some fashion into your security program and making this a continuous part of your security posture awareness and those kinds of things. So really it's a notion of taking the threat intelligence that exists out in the world and not just using threat intelligence for indicators of compromise or configuring systems, but actually taking that threat intelligence and applying it in the context of your environment and using it as an exercise to say, where would we be vulnerable with respect to these types of threats? So you talk about threat-informed defense a lot, right? Okay, what are the controls that we would need to put in place? But from the pen testing perspective, why don't we take these threat intel feeds and threat intelligence as a whole and actually utilize it to build our test plans, right? Our test plans and narrow the scope, try to accommodate or accelerate the tactics and procedures that we're trying to execute, so that you actually have a good perspective of how are we doing with respect to these threats, and having a better cadence of communication to stakeholders, right? Definitely one benefit that we've seen is the ability to speak more intelligently to stakeholders like the board and executives when these bigger things come out, right? Like the kind of the OpenSSL issue, for example, or the Uber breach.
Yeah, I wasn't going to necessarily use that as an example for this, right? Like I have that in my back pocket for other examples, but I think of it. Let me first relate it back to writing software. Right? If you were to say, like, there's cross-site scripting, and go, okay, I'm going to adjust my code, fix my code, as it were, to be resilient towards cross-site scripting. And then say, you know what, if ever there was a day where we get a cross-site scripting attack against our site, we'll totally not be vulnerable and we'll totally be able to detect it. I mean, the first thing my project manager or VP of product or whoever's going to say to me is, well, did you write a unit test for that? And actually, or did you actually try to have a cross-site scripting attack and see if your code works? Did you prevent it? Did you detect it? That's the first thing you do with software. We tend to not be as diligent about that in our network. We tend to go, oh, like I would, tune this thing over here and detect cross-site scripting attacks. So when they happen, like, trust me, we're going to detect them. And this threat-based penetration test, I think is just that. The reason I think I really love it even more when you just described it, Dan, was because I think of it as unit testing, right? I think we've talked about attack and breach simulation being a similar thing, having an actual person do it even better. They're actually like unit testing. We do the same thing with threats. We go, the OpenSSL thing as an example. I was going to use one of our stories. The attack Tyler and I were talking about is I bring my own domain controller, and I use that to try and launch attacks against the existing domain. And you may say to like your Windows team, you should do this, this, and this to prevent against that. Okay, now let's go introduce a new domain controller and see if your controls actually worked. I think that's kind of what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it allows for that more of a purple teaming concept with your threat intelligence team, which I think is predominantly kind of tied to the blue team and like identifying IOCs and where you should put detections in, but then tying that back with the red team of saying like, hey, do we have a way to test for these items and then actually know that the configurations that we've made, and then you can, like, just like a unit test, you can now put this on a cycle of like, hey, we're going to test this every week or every month, depending on the severity of the threat or the realistic notion of the threat. But it also I would say disciplines the red team in a different manner, right? I mean, today, predominantly red teams kind of have carte blanche, right? And they're just going to do whatever they like at the, whatever the flavor of the month is from a technique or attack, which is fine. I think that I'm not saying that you shouldn't have that notion, but I think use that more in the aspects of we do that on a quarterly or an annual basis where we just have carte blanche, just see how we can get in. Everything else should really be like, hey, how are we protecting against these known knowns, and how are we testing for them to actually show that we're making progress, right? And the controls that we're putting in place. So it is a very similar concept to the breach and attack simulation, the purple team notion, but actually taking the threat intelligence aspects into account for, hey, we could go test against this threat, but it really doesn't apply to our environment, right? Or our industry and those kinds of things. So really utilizing threat intelligence to inform your pen testing program.
And these can be simple threat intelligence. Hold on, I was just going to say, Tyler, and then I'll let you go, I promise. Because I have this thought and I'll lose it. The CISA KEV, right, and MITRE ATT&CK could be good places to start. I mean, let's start with the most basic, out there threat intelligence. You don't have to go crazy. These are pretty well defined at this point, and let's go test against those in our network and use that as the so-called threat. I mean, MITRE ATT&CK slightly. I mean, there's aspects of that can be difficult, right, to really truly replicate. But then I like your let gloves off. Let's get really creative. That should really be the penetration tests, because you can go, well, we tried a bunch of this stuff already, and we know about it. We test for it. You're not going to gain anything further by doing that because we do it already. The quarterly pen test or whatever should be gloves off. Let's get creative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
This is where I'd love to hear some of your kind of experience and thought process around this, Dan, because the verbiage that we're using and the means in which most companies can do these engagements, many of the smaller companies do not have internal red teams. So a red team typically is an internal team doing continuous testing, or at least a contracting and consulting firm doing those continual tests. Now, if you're doing just annual pen tests, the pen test and the coverage, your security team should be leveraging these ongoing metrics, these qualitative coverage tests, in order to get all of the low-hanging fruit where you're not going to get a good return on investment if your red team or pen test company are finding, Eternal Blue or proxy login or zero log, any of the dumb things. You want your pen test company or your red team company, the external team, the team that has the gloves off, you want them to be very creative. You want them to find the holes that your automated tools are not finding, that your coverage tests, unit tests, qualitative threat testing is not finding. Those are the areas that you have pretty good coverage. You have good documentation. You have very good online resources to coverage that. It's the things that you're not thinking about that cannot be automated, where you're chaining together someone coming in, hitting your multifunction printer, installing malware on that, and then proxying, some custom C2 to a CDN. That stuff you're not thinking about, and bringing your own domain controller. Those are the things you want to be able to test and make sure you have good alerts and time to detection, time to remediation, so you can test your blue team and their ability to respond to an incident, rather than just patching holes and vulnerabilities. So can you speak to some of how that should function between smaller orgs and larger orgs?
No, I think that's a great call out, right? I mean, I think this concept is good in for both fronts, but especially on the smaller company or the smaller team size, where you may not have a full internal red team or internal pen test team, or even feel like you have the skills to do it, but you can at least take some of these test procedures, like when we talk about MITRE ATT&CK, and you can actually sample them in your environment. Yeah, you can run a few commands, you can run a few techniques to at least say okay, I'm able to identify this type of attack in our environment. But it also can help you as the smaller team inform your service provider, hey, this is the kind of engagement we want to set up over the next year. Like, let's do 12, like I know that service providers are moving towards a more, they're always trying to find like more, continuous forms of revenue, right? I mean, and that's just like a business concept, but more offering it as a service, right? And so pen testing as a service is a common nomenclature. Whether you're doing automated testing, using a platform to do that automating testing, or a service provider, you're doing something in a continuous fashion and getting this service. So being able to communicate with your service provider and say, like, these are the things that we want to be testing for. We want to make sure we have good controls around these types of threats, and then it really actually helps solidify the conversation around what you're looking for. And then every year we're going to do the big one that we already know these are the gaps we've looked at and we've plugged. So now we want you to find like the really oddball things, right? And that seems to work really well, especially for those smaller teams. And then the same concept applies for the larger teams, where the penetration testing team or the internal red team is really doing this on a weekly basis, and they can inject, in real time, new threats that might come out. Like, if we see something happening tomorrow, they can say, like, okay, what are the true, TTPs that we would pull out of this type of attack, put it into our testing program and test it right away. So it's our form of triage from, like, say Log4j comes out, the blue team's going to be searching for it and patching it. The red team can be continuously testing for it as well if they know the types of techniques. So it really helps speed up that process of identifying what are the key threats that matter, what are the controls that we have implemented, and are they being tested on a regular basis? And that frees up the conversation for the more unique and what we would call robust or boutique type tests, so that all that low hanging fruit is already taken care of, or even just ignored from the scope.
What I like about that, though, Dan, is that I think you help, as a pen tester in this model, the organization understand the risk more quickly and the impact, right? In Log4j as an example, you can go, oh, like, that looks bad. Like, maybe it's bad. I don't know how bad it is in this application. And like a week goes by while you're still trying to figuring out how to patch it and prioritize it across maybe your thousands of applications. And then your internal red team comes along and goes, oh yeah, we added that as an inject like earlier in the week, and I've got a copy of like your entire database. So that should be a really high priority, maybe for this set of applications over here, but your other applications, like, we ran the same test, and like I'm not holding a copy of your database. So like, prioritize those. I mean, this is a really, I think, rapid way to help prioritize remediation potentially.
Does PlexTrack run books? Is that something that is kind of helping with this particular problem? I mean, you guys are the only ones.
I was going to say, like, if only we had a platform to help us track all this activity.
I know, right? Jeez.
It's a great segue, Tom.
Yeah. That's a good one. Yeah, that is exactly it. I mean, like, obviously, there's other ways to track and manage these things. But yeah, the runbooks module within PlexTrack really does serve as that collaborative example, and you can pull in these emulation plans or these threat vectors and create your own test plans that then you can just say, hey, we ran it, we're running it every week, we've got the data, so then you can actually show the progress and have the analytics around it. And like I said, several of our customers do this already, and one of them does like Purple Team Thursdays, right? They're doing testing every Thursday. Actually, several of them, maybe not always on Thursdays, but they have weekly Purple Team engagements where they're like, hey, we're going to test these things. So that's the perfect time for them to inject maybe mid-priority or, things that are like, hey, these are happening. We don't know if it's happening in our environment. Our blue team's aware of it, but we're going to just inject it into our weekly testing. Or they just like spin up a right away and say, hey, we're going to go, right away and get this evaluated.
Dan, I have a funny story for you when you mentioned like there's multiple ways to track it, right? And so I've got this graphic, and I put this on my LinkedIn profile. And the genie comes out of the bottle and says there's 3 rules. No wishing for death, no falling in love, no bringing back dead people. And the person with the wishes says, I want to use Excel as a database. And the genie goes, okay, there's 4 rules. 4 rules. I feel like the person could have said, like, I want to use Excel to track my red team efforts and my vulnerabilities. Jeannie would have had to say,
Technically, as a database, right?
now there's 5 rules.
Oh, shit.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
You should use that one. This should be in your marketing, actually.
Yeah.
Think about it.
New marketing for PlexTrack. We're better than Excel.
Exactly. I think we actually have some of that in some of our language and tweets and things like that for sure.
Yeah.
A question for you. You've got. I've got a question for you. So, PlexTrack has this really good collaborative, the run books, there's a lot of pieces of it. I'm wondering, is there anything that's starting to standardize across multiple companies, are you starting to see people go, this is the industry standard?
Changing a paradigm is always hard, right? In terms of we see a lot of people that are still very, set in their ways, so to speak, on and using us in a good way. I'm saying this is bad, but kind of set in hey, I still want to get out to the document and have the document look the way I want it to, and we support that, and that's a key feature of PlexTrack. What is exciting is seeing a little bit more of the vision take hold in terms of hey, these are dynamic results. We should be able to collaborate on these effectively. So utilizing PlexTrack as kind of that standard way of viewing pen test results. I would say we're getting traction there. We're still growing as a company, and clearly making a difference in people's lives, and that's first and foremost. I mean, it's I think everybody on this call has hated spending hours resizing screenshots. So I mean, those were some of the early pain points that we set out to solve. So things like that. But so I would say, yeah, it's happening. And we're glad to be a part of it, right? It's not, our goal is not to just, our goal is to really help the community standardize on this is how pen test results and threat-informed pen testing or continuous testing should really be conducted, whether you use PlexTrack or not. This is the notion of getting away from static delivery of results and copying and pasting things around, and just cumbersome ways to collaborate on not only the findings, but the actual tracking and remediation of them.
Nice.
I think that's the interesting place. Oh. So that's the interesting place where verticals start to matter, right? PlexTrack, I think, offers something great because it is a standardized place for information to end up for pen tests, whatever framework you're using. But between verticals and pen testing and the offensive space, you're probably never going to see a standard. You got NIST, you got PTES, you've got whatever vertical you're in, you have a pen testing or offensive or metric-based standard that you have to follow. And I don't think those are ever going to change. Now, how we actually do the reporting, how we measure that, and how the company views that, that's the piece that I actually wanted to see change. The methodology itself, they're all sixes. They all kind of do the same thing. We're all shooting towards the goal of security maturity and building roadmaps and getting better, right? But at the end of the day, the metrics and the things that we measure against and how we actually have to report those, especially as someone that is the creative side of the offensive pieces of those, the mundane pieces and the very rigorous sides that need to be tracked, that need to be quantitative and not qualitative, those are the pieces that I think you guys are solving that really does add some value to the offensive space's life.
Mandy? Do you have a question?
Yeah, I was going to say, I didn't want to interrupt because I thought I heard Mandy.
I thought I heard Mandy too.
Yeah, I was wondering with Dan or anybody, so looking at the white paper from PlexTrack about the hack pen test routine, and here it's brought out a 10-phase approach. And for the audience that's listening, the 10 phases brought out here: setup, discovery, enumeration, detection, exploitation, post-exploitation, reporting, readout, remediation, and then retesting. And I was just wondering, across the industry, in what percentage of engagements do you feel that these phases are all covered?
Oh, that's a loaded question. But no, I think it's a great one. I mean, obviously everybody's going to kind of have a little bit of their own different methodology. Where we would really emphasize is, however you're structuring the exploitation part and the coordination of the engagement itself, that tends to be fluid. It's still important to kind of have some structure and methodology around it. What we really try to emphasize, through PlexTrack is that the reporting and tracking and remediation definitely needs to happen, right? And it needs to be, in a much more dynamic and livable way. And that's what we're offering, because how many times have you delivered a pen test report that's a PDF, and Joe, in the security engineering team, copies out the 3 critical findings and leaves everything else, in the document, and then Joe leaves, and you come back a year later and basically rewrite the same report. And like, well, what happened to Joe? He's like, well, he put these 3 in, and I don't know, in Jira or whatever, or a spreadsheet. So the tracking and remediation is really, really important. And I would say like that is changing, but I would not say that that there's a big standard, on that piece. And that's what Tyler was highlighting as well, is being able to have better data around those phases is really, really important.
Yeah. And I like too the point in this paper about bringing up choosing the template so that the researchers, everybody who's involved and the stakeholder knows the template and the amount of information, and really how much, I think it even says here that pen tester is only as good as their last report.
So true.
Yeah.
So true.
Yeah. What have you done for me lately? Right. Is that?
Yep.
The harsh reality of it, really. That's it right there.
Right. Yeah. No, yeah. Go ahead.
I think it's interesting. Have you guys started to see the dynamic where you're able to bring in and find some of these more mature places, or even the very immature places, and offer those kind of runbook or simulation and emulation guidelines, a framework where people just don't know where to get started? They don't have either a budget, or they've not allocated the time or money to get a pen test. So they have to rely on their internal security team to begin down that journey of what do we prioritize and how do we begin looking for certain aspects. What are some of the things that you guys are seeing and able to help with in order to get those journeys started? Or with the very mature places, you've got the fundamentals down, you've got a very complex environment. What are the qualitative project and roadmap items that we need to put a framework and some organization behind in order to get a much better scoped pen test and or engagement, or even an internal validation piece? What are those kind of 2 dynamics that you can talk to?
Yeah, that's a lot. But I think to get started, right, to kind of go with what have we seen and what has worked, is definitely like we emphasize that kind of that crawl, walk, run mentality, where what you got to get started somewhere, and so it's not the tradition, like I would say, traditional in a kind of condescending way of like, hey, let's see what somebody recommends in terms of just go buying an automated scanner and just doing stuff, right, and not really knowing what you're doing, having a structure around it, having a program oriented approach. So you buy this and you maybe run a few scans or for a few tests, and then it just kind of is there, but you're not really getting a lot of value out of it, right? So we really emphasize, like, what problem are you trying to solve? Okay, I want to be able to proactively test for advanced attacks or techniques that might bypass a lot of the security controls that I've put in place, right? So starting with a distinct problem statement, and that then starts you down the path of building a program around this. Okay, I want to be able to test these types of techniques. These are known in the wild. They're things we should be detecting and or preventing. And so we're gonna use a run book to say, like, hey, I'm gonna test these techniques, and we're gonna do this every week. And so then you start to get this into that crawl phase of like, we're just doing this manually. And you can use a spreadsheet for this. I mean, I wouldn't recommend it, but because you want the tracking and the analytics out of this. So you start there, right? And then, hey, we can integrate with a third-party automated pen test service, or utilize an external service to do additional testing and have a central place to track all of this information. So what we're seeing is that there are organizations where they may not have an internal red team, an internal pen test team, or those defined skill sets. Obviously, there's a lot of blue teamers out there that really want to get into that space, right? And they want to get into pen testing. And so this actually kind of gives them a mechanism to be able to do that as well, in terms of like, hey, I can start here. I'm not a full-blown pen tester or know everything about how to conduct an engagement, but I can start with these these procedures and continue to execute them, track them, show the results, have deeper collaboration and deeper discussions on what we should be doing to defend against these. So we've really seen that work, where the run scenario would be like, hey, we're now integrating a lot of other data sets as well, whether that's vulnerability scanners, automated, like I think I mentioned before, like automated pen test or breach and attack simulation providers, and being able to really incorporate a robust and holistic program around all the different types of threats. So that's what we've seen work, and I think it helps for organizations that are really kind of getting off the ground and may even need to be justifying, hey, we really should go hire some internal pen test team resources or things like that.
Yeah, Dan, my question around the threats and internal pen test teams, and I think it relates back to being able to track things, right? Because it's an important aspect of this. There's a couple of different attack classes that I've looked at lately and wondered, like, how would you even incorporate this in a pen test? Like, let's say I want to exploit and or manipulate your UEFI BIOS in an attack. And the risk that carries with it is, well, I mean, I could potentially, like, air quotes, permanently brick your system. That's a tough sell, right?
Yeah.
That's a tough sell. But I think you need an internal red team, right? I think it almost, I mean, it could be external, but I think better if it's internal. And I think you need a dedicated laptop, right, in this example, that doesn't belong to anyone but the internal red team. That's like the cookie cutter system that you would supply to your employees, your golden image, right?
Just go to the help desk and get a loaner. It's good.
Yeah, exactly.
And you conduct that test. I think the other kind of advanced threat, since you were talking about that stuff, is like manipulating device drivers to bypass defenses. Unless you're running these, especially in that case, like the phrase "it depends" really comes into play as to whether or not that could be successful. But I also think, to speak more to like your product and the solution, is having a good place to document those results is really important to this kind of exercise, right? Because this is also something that I think maybe requires, now that I think about thinking out loud, like requires more documentation. Like, yes, I have to go get a separate laptop, right? Like, we have to be cool with, like, it's going to be bricked. I'm going to document what I do. Even more so for an advanced attack that may require even more explanation and more documentation, right? Do you see that kind of tying into one, advanced red teams, and two, like your product too, right? Having a place to document it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because like you said, that's not something you're probably going to do every week, right? But like, you'd like to at least know, like, hey, when was the last time we did this, and build it into your program, right? So being able to document those details. Here's what we did. Here were the techniques that we tested this time. Here were some recommendations. Here were the fixes. So you have that in a central place that you can just pull it up, right? And it's not, hey, where's is that on the shared drive somewhere?
Yeah, like we did this experiment, and it's on a Google Drive or whatever somewhere. Yeah.
The other big problem with that, and the thing that I see a lot of places fall down on, and this is why you're speaking to this kind of lost document, right, is many places only have a quarterly, maybe semi-annually roll-up with certain executives. A lot of executives in very large corporations are very busy. So the trickle-down effect or trickle-up effect of getting the business risk and articulating the qualitative different tests that have happened in an organization and keeping that organized in a manner that an executive is going to understand in the language that they know becomes very difficult. And most technical places, most technical departments fall down in this area. So having that central location where you can roll up something like a technical executive summary into a formalized executive summary or executive briefing and have all of those metrics and tests and documents in one place for them to go and look at, or more likely they're going to push that down to something like a VP or a director and have them look at those and push back up results. That becomes very important at the executive level for that executive buy-in and for the resource and management of getting the next year's budget and or maybe the next project and roadmap allocated, especially in very large organizations.
I think
exactly because. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I think Tyler just named it. It's the InfoSec trickle up theory. You know, like trickle down, trickle up, trickle sideways.
It's a trickle in some direction.
But Dan, I think you just got a new module that Tyler named for you, or close to it.
It's the trickle module. I love it. But no, you're exactly right, Tyler. And I think you touched on it before, and maybe I didn't explain it in the other part of my answer. But like when we talk about the prioritization, right, and the priorities, that all ties back to resources, budget, talent. You know, where are we going to place our strategic bets? Because as a security team, we don't have unlimited resources, and we all know this, and we all know that time is money, and we're all constrained by it, and people are burning out. So if I have a to visualize what are the priorities, and if threat intelligence is actually being used, you can actually apply that as part of the context of like, hey, because we've tested these things, by the way, this is being actively exploited in the wild, and we're vulnerable to it, and here's the proof. That actually, brings up the priority of whatever the compensating controls or the mitigation factors that need to be invested in to eliminate that risk or reduce it. So having a centralized place to visualize where our priorities need to lie, is really important.
Dan, does it have to be an actual pen test? Because there are some, I'm talking fringe cases. So like, let's say you did a tabletop exercise and you determined that if this particular condition or set of conditions were to happen, let's say against our VMware environment, how long would it take you to recover from that? And sometimes that answer is weeks, and that would be really bad.
TM.
Does PlexTrack give us the ability to like capture that tabletop in those discussions?
Yeah, absolutely. You can, like, we talk about run books from the technical perspective, but really it's just like a set of things that we're like looking at, right? So you can use the run books module for tabletop exercises, but also just as the central reporting, mechanism for that. Like, here's the scenario, here were the people involved. We have the whole capability to write a very robust report and a readout of that tabletop exercise. So that's kind of in that walk or even run scenario when we're talking about like kind of the maturity of a program, but tabletops are a very important part of that, and they don't have to be technical, but you can still document here was what we did, here was the scenario, here's who was involved, here's the timeline, here were the findings or the things that we need to go work on.
And because I think that's important, because you wouldn't actually take down your VMware environment for 2 weeks and take that hit, right? That is something, to my previous examples, right? You might want a tabletop, because they can't just like go get a laptop and replicate that necessarily, right? When you get in a large scale VMware environment, like, it is what it is. If you have two of them, you're testing like failover and replication between them. Like, it's a hard thing to put into practice, right? So you would tabletop something, even though I'm not a huge fan of like theoretical security in that case. Sometimes you just got to tabletop it and go like and being able to capture that, I think is super important.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you think about not even theoreticals, but who would be responsible for doing XYZ in this scenario, and when you like tabletop it out, you might realize there's a gap somewhere, and that becomes a finding or something that needs to get addressed, and so you have a way to track that. So it does work very well for that, and we do have customers that utilize PlexTrack as part of their tabletop exercises for sure.
Nice.
I was just going to ask because that hits right on something that I talk about a lot, is RACI charts, because you find out in a tabletop, you find out, who's going to do this? Like, well, I don't know. And so you pull out the RACI charts. They're like, and then of course half the time it's like, what's a RACI chart? It's like, oh God.
Hold on. What's a RACI chart? Because I have a very different depiction in my head than probably what it is. I'm just saying.
It's a pinup chart. No, a RACI chart is a chart of, for each responsibility or function or application or whatever, who is responsible, who is accountable, who is consulted, and who is informed. There's various types of these. Some of them have an E, some of them have various letters, but that's the one I use. And it's a very simple thing to do. If we're going to do if we're going to promote code to production, okay, great. Who is responsible for it? who is accountable for it. There can only be one accountable. That's basically the owner of that task or that application or that whatever. And then there's who's consulted, hey, we're going to promote code. Is this cool? Yeah, that's fine. Good by me. And who's informed? By the way, we're going to promote code. There's a maintenance window from 11 to 2, blah, that kind of thing. So that chart allows you to find out every aspect of anybody's, not responsibility, that's the R, of course, but anybody's interaction with that function, that application, that task.
So we're gonna restore the VMware environment. Who does that? Oh, that's Joe. Well, Joe left 3 months ago. So like, who's doing that?
Yeah.
Right. That interacts with HR, that interacts with your vacation system, that interacts with your ticketing system, and that interacts with your tracking of, hey, we're about to do an exercise, a tabletop. We need these 15 people because they're the accountables and responsibles for the things we're going to be doing. Where are they? Oh, they're all on vacation, or they're all at a conference that week. We're going to have a really hard time doing this. Actually, it's a great time to do the tabletop because what happens when everybody's away?
What happens when everyone's that?
Yeah.
But, I mean, so then
there's often those pieces that are forgotten, right? Like, who is handling the PR? Like, if we do get hit by ransomware, is that PR response and immediate notification, is that pre-canned? Is that written already? Like, has legal looked at whether that PR should go out and is legally binding us to things that we don't want to say? All of those things as part of your tabletop, then prioritize who needs to get involved at what stage, and that builds that reputation for those run books that then can get called into action, because a run book is really no good unless it's utilized when it is needed to be utilized. So when it's called into action, it better be done.
So then the question is, and this goes back to you, Dan, forgive me, is can those run books, can those charts, can those documents, can those playbooks, can they be, the run books, excuse me, can they be linked into the various pieces of my corporate infrastructure so that for my HR, because what was it, John or whatever, got laid off 3 months ago, can we do something to make them not only iterative, but also vaguely intelligent?
So to a degree, I would say yes. I mean, like that's kind of it's a little bit of a different type of a product, I'll be honest. But being able to track and understand like who's responsible for what, you can assign items to folks and have operators at different levels, and who's responsible for what with respect to an engagement or the findings that come out of that. And we do interact with Jira and ServiceNow from the tracking remediation side. So I mean, we don't integrate with HR systems or things like that. Obviously, asset management we do, and things like that. But at least it gives a centralized mechanism for identifying here's what the scenarios were, here's what we're testing, here's who is responsible for fixing these items, and who was involved in the exercise, right? And I think something like that you're saying, like, hey, a gap was identified, like we don't know who the PR person is, that would just be listed as a finding that you would then say, like, hey, someone's got to track this down and identify it, and then it gets documented in that fashion. So a little bit different of a scenario when we're talking about the corporate infrastructure and HR systems and things like that, but certainly could be a launch pad for it.
Okay, cool. And I've got another question I've got to ask, because, and this goes back to it sort of goes back to the question I asked before, and it's been bugging me, and I really want to ask this, so I apologize. And I'm throwing this at you out of the I'm really learning and playing and working in the supply chain world more and more and more. And it's not just, SolarWinds attack, SolarWinds Orion or whatever. It's not just Kaseya. It's not just your what everybody thinks of as supply chain. It's also third-party vendor management. It's supply chain risk management as defined in NIST CSF 1.1. It's all sorts of things that are, third parties are more vital to all of our information security and information technology than people even realize these days. We don't have perimeters anymore. We just have who are we connected to, okay? And so the problem is that the standard of care for third-party risk management, for vendor risk management, is a questionnaire, which is about as useful as if you never mind. So the point is that I want to get to a place where I'm looking at something like PlexTrack to decide, hey, this vendor is actually, they're doing well. Yes, there are findings, but they're working on them actively. They're doing things actively. They are really working with me to show me that they are properly handling their security. And I want PlexTrack to be able to do that, to be able to show me that they can handle their shit, if you'll excuse the expression. Where do you stand in that discussion? And again, I'm throwing this at you out of the blue. I apologize.
Oh yeah, no, but it's a perfect use case, right? Because I think of it in the context of, we have the notion of being able to segment. We call them clients. They could be projects. They could be third party. They could be vendors, right? And so, like, let's speak in the term of vendors. Like, you could have your own profile of a vendor that you can aggregate all of their assessments. So not only could you conduct a questionnaire on them, and have that data alongside the pen test that you wanted to conduct on them, or bring in the pen test results that they're claiming that they had, right? Bring that alongside any other vulnerability scans or any other purple team engagements, proactive assessments. So not only can you aggregate all that data in their silo called a vendor or a client, but then you have the analytics to show, well, are they fixing these things? Because within PlexTrack, you can actually identify, like, hey, who's responsible for this? When was it fixed? And actually apply SLAs. So this is the nice thing about PlexTrack in terms of the analytics capabilities, is that you can apply service level agreements. Like, hey, vendor X, like we said that any critical vulnerabilities that were identified out of your assessment need to be fixed within 2 days, or whatever it is, and then you can actually benchmark them and see it and visualize it. So it's actually could be very powerful. It is very powerful for that use case.
Dan, what Josh really wants to know is, can you upload an SBOM to it?
Oh, stop!
Because when Josh has a supply chain issue, the SBOM is the hammer, and every problem looks like a nail.
It's not true.
SBOM.
There's also the firmware bombs, which are all about you and your F bombs.
Yeah, you don't want to drop your F bombs. You want to keep your F bombs. Those are important.
I mean, there's security questions, there's granularity questions. 14 things to 14 partners, and you can only see this little piece of it. There's all sorts of questions about that. So Dan, I'm probably going to hit you up, and we're going to do some more talking about that, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Wait, would then F-bomb be a firmwher bill of materials?
Firmware bill of materials, Larry.
That's what I thought.
You're in and you got some F bombs too.
Yeah,
you do. You do have F bombs.
Tons
Don't
of
drop
F-bombs.
them.
Got tons of F-bombs.
Tons of F bombs.
No way we're dropping those, baby. No way.
So Dan, I am curious, since we haven't chatted in a while, what kind of things do you guys have on the roadmap? What's new? What's coming up?
Yeah, no, great question. So on the immediate side, we actually are enhancing the runbooks modules. So there's going to be some new capabilities that I don't want to speak too granular, because we're actually kind of releasing the beta of it actually tomorrow. So like, it comes out to customers that are already runbooks customers. So
yeah, it's okay if you say it's on the roadmap. It's
right.
It's fair game.
But genuinely, to our current existing runbooks customers, they have a capability of opting into a beta for runbooks, the enhanced features of that. So that's exciting, and that actually will launch in Q1, full GA. We later this month, we're actually increasing the capabilities that we have with our Jira integration, so you can map a lot more fields and have a much deeper integration with Jira, and that really is going to help a lot of customers. So those are some kind of like nice enhancements to the product.
You can tell Dan is very well versed, right? Because if you notice that, he said that the next release, which will be in Q1, which is a 3-month time window.
See, I can speak it.
You can speak that product management language. I'm proud of you.
Yeah. But I've seen the code work, so it's there. It's not vaporware.
Right. There is a difference between a roadmap and vaporware. Yeah, certainly.
Right. Yeah. But actually, in early Q1 of next year, we're actually working on a new module, so an actual really big enhancement, and we're calling. Well, I don't want to say what our market. We haven't really landed on the marketing term. The notion is like being able to aggregate everything from vulnerabilities and kind of all of these other risks, and identifying these are the key program initiatives that we should be working on. So and being able to add your own context in. So it's actually elevating the aggregation of the data to show the true prioritization that you should have, and being able to add in your own context. So it really is going to be an exciting module that we're all excited about. It's been heavily requested. And
yeah, Tim, one of the questions that I asked earlier today was, when you do vulnerability remediation and prioritization, do you use CVSS score, do you take into account business risk? Do you do rocks, paper, scissors? And the interesting theory is, if you were to pick any one of those and compare it to one of the others on the list, would it be any different? Right? I mean, that's a joke around the really hard problem we have to solve around remediation prioritization, which it sounds like what your next feature is going to speak to. I think me, you, and Tyler have probably independently had those discussions with you. It is the hardest problem, right? Mm-hmm. Conceivably, the blue teams face. I mean, we have a lot of technical challenges, certainly on both red and blue teams, but the overarching organizational problem is, how do I prioritize that remediation, given I've got all of these findings, for example, that ended up in PlexTrack? Sounds like you're addressing that head on.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, you can, and we'll have our own kind of weighting to things, but also you can add, you will be able to add your own. So hey,
you need a rocks, paper, scissors thing, in the
right. Yeah.
And it's just, you play rocks, paper, scissors.
Yeah. Make it random. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. No. So yeah, if it was found as part of a pen test or part of a, a deeper threat intel analysis, that might weight it higher so that,
or
at least
tabletop.
you have the visibility.
I like tabletop in that mix too. All these different places where these findings come from now kind of help me prioritize them. That's a hard problem.
Yep. Yeah. So why not, take it on?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, where are we going to get if we only tackle the easy problems, right?
Exactly.
Mandy?
Well, I wanted to say, as someone who I like doing, I don't like documenting. And yet, on the other hand, I also absolutely love full and complete information. I want the data. I want accurate information. And one thing I really like about PlexTrack, and talking about the tabletop and putting everything together, is it makes me think of the age-old, even World War II, where you're having to figure out how to reduce survivorship bias, meaning the planes that were coming back. Most of them had damage in the fuselage, not on the engines. So in trying to figure out how to put the most effective armor on the plane, they would go, oh, well, we need to put it on the fuselage. The problem was they were ignoring that the majority of the planes that were not coming back had engine damage. So they were only looking at what was presenting in the field, not why. And I love that with PlexTrack, with all that, it helps take that we are on the front lines. This is still kind of a warfare side, and we do have to look at additional data and in new ways. And I feel like that's part of what PlexTrack can bring to stakeholders and to the pen testers and everybody.
And I promise I didn't pay you to say this, or at least tee this up, right? But
but you gave her that.
Yeah, I see something excited. Got it. That's all.
Yeah. No, but it's true. And it's funny because our true mission statement at PlexTrack is that we empower teams to win the right cybersecurity battles, right? So it's how do I know I'm fighting the right battle, right? And working on the right things.
Yeah. And I think we all need to take that feeling, we're talking about burnout, talking about mental health. I think it's okay for every one of us that's in the field to go no, you know what? This was my part of winning the war. This was my part of contributing.
I mean, that is saving most of us pen testers. This has been an old age phrase that we've all said. I would do this job for free all day. In fact, many of us were hacking before we got paid to do this. Yep. So it's the writing the report side of this and keeping track of stuff that they pay me a lot of money to do because it sucks so bad. So Dan's just saving me money.
Yeah, Tyler, yep. I love that. I love that. You do the pen testing for free when they pay me to write the report.
Yeah.
That's.
Yep.
That is smart. Yeah.
You're only good as your last report, Tyler. So they better pay you well for it.
Pen testers are not professional, meaning that they're not working for a large corporation because they can't write or they can't speak to a client.
I mean, some of us can, but we've taken decades to do that. And honestly, I don't like writing. I'm very good at technical writing because I had to be.
Yep.
And many of us have gotten good at technical writing because we've had to do that. So those are skills that you can get more people into an industry or put them into a role. If they are lacking that doesn't disqualify them from a consultancy role. If there are things and tools and ways to make that easier in order to get up to speed and to be better at it. I think we should all aspire to be better. verbally, better articulating our words on paper.
Yeah,
those are things that
also,
just come with time. But
also, though, Tyler, I think the education system, at least here in the U.S., has done us a disservice in respects to technical writing, because I'm at the point now where I'm starting to coach some other people on technical writing, and I'm realizing that the first thing I should start off with was all those things you learned in school about writing, forget them and throw them right out the window, because they're like, but like in school I was taught to do. Yeah, I'm like, yeah, forget all that.
In school,
like
I learned passive voice.
Yeah,
what is active voice? I don't understand.
Out the window. Out the window. Yeah.
Tyler's heard that one I don't know how many times. Active voice.
yeah, there's a lot to English I wish I would have learned. In fact, I spend a lot of time paying attention to my 5th graders and 8th graders English and proper writing, and even some of the stuff taught there I would say doesn't serve very well in the business world, or many could learn from them to be served well in the business world as well. So
I think there's this is an interesting thing, for PlexTrack, to maybe have like a module, Dan, or something that teaches people how to write, because when you write a post on social media versus an email versus like a letter versus some kind of technical writing, those are like all very different styles of writing. I think writing a book is, you and I experienced, Larry, like even a separate, but I mean, it was some technical writing, but there were some different nuances. And it was copy edited differently than a technical
and think about when we wrote that book, how much our writing style has changed and improved since then.
Oh yeah, you basically, I had to get yelled. I had to get yelled at a lot.
It's not the same. We're not. I mean, even if we were doing stuff that was good, we're still not the same people that we. Yeah.
Well, and that's not just this industry. I mean, that's every industry. Like I think a lot of us that like to do things, we don't also love reading and writing them out. And I know, working in law enforcement before, that was one of the biggest stressors for any of the officers, was that they wanted to be policemen or whatever because they wanted to be action oriented, and they were not prepped in any way to do report writing, or like a lot of them couldn't write enough, and that was their biggest source of stress, and they would burn out more because of the paperwork problem and having to write than because of anything they're facing in the field.
Oh, marketing materials and press releases are almost like a slightly different style of writing.
Yeah, and I mean, I always mentor folks like that are, regardless of being a pen tester, just being a security professional, is like, you have to be able to communicate effectively, right? And whether you're conveying the type of risk that exists, based on these findings, so that you're not playing chicken little all the time. And I think that's kind of the blue team side of it, is like, how do I convey what the actual impact is and the risk and everything? But being able to communicate that effectively is really important, because these kinds of things actually go up to sometimes to the highest level in the organization. While I don't think it's on the roadmap to create any kind of AI mechanism to teach people how to read and write, I will say we do have a content database that you can use where everybody can collaborate on, like, this is how we write up SQL injection, right? This is how we write up cross-site scripting, and it's so at least in that way we help support some standardization on language.
Well, templatized verbiage is half of the battle in a report, and having that well done provides context for those that are still trying to learn how to technically write better. Totally. I think it's nothing but good from that standpoint, and offering some tools and mechanisms to see good writing and have reports that are consistent across each customer and the quality that is being output.
The struggles are real, Tyler.
I mean, also, like, if I'm editing or writing a blog post that is ultimately going to be public, I'm somewhat, depending on the circumstances, less worried about something like Grammarly, which actually is reading your text, which is kind of frightening. I'm a lot more concerned if it's reading my findings in a pen test report. Like that could be, that could be bad. So, and Grammarly is certainly a crutch, but used with caution.
I've never used it. I toot my own horn. I've never used it. I think I've done pretty well without it.
Yeah, I mean, it helps you develop good habits.
When I was developing those habits, I wished it had existed, but it didn't. Yeah. So, ouch.
For sure. Well, cool. Dan, anything else you want to, share with us?
No, it's been great. Yeah, I mean, great discussion, and always happy to have good information. And again, I think kind of wrapping it back up, like the threat intelligence piece is an important, can be a very important part of your program, and I think it gets lost a lot on just predominantly how do we put this into IOCs for the defensive side, right? So,
I forgot to say it at the top of the show that this segment is, or was, I guess now, sponsored by PlexTrack. You can go to securityweekly.com/PlexTrack to learn more. Dan, thank you so much for coming back on Paul Security Weekly.
Absolutely. Thank you. Always enjoy the discussion. Good to see everybody too.
Coming up next, the security news. Stay tuned.